Does Dabo Swinney need to win the ACC to avoid hot seat conversations? Dabo Swinney has been fantastic for the Clemson football program and just went 9-4 in what was a wildly disappointing year. It's their worst season over there in Clemson, South Carolina since 2010, in which they went 6-7. That's the last time they didn't win double-digit games with Dabo Swinney at the helm. The ACC going into this year is not particularly strong. I think they have a better chance in the Big 12 to get two teams into the college football playoff. That doesn't mean it's a great chance. In all likelihood, the ACC and the Big 12 are one-bid leagues. Clemson could be one of those teams, though, because they'll get a level of brand recognition and respect that other teams might not if it comes down to a subjective vote of which team has the better season, who do we want in the playoff, etc., etc. Can't wait to do that in the 12-team era when everyone, thought that the 12-team era would fix all that. Yeah, we're just going to have those conversations again, just stretched out to who makes the 12-team college football playoff. But I digress. So for Dabo Swinney, he didn't make the ACC Championship game a season ago. He's only won the ACC one time in the last 3 years. He's won it 7 out of the last 9, but that's being thrown out the window because the transfer portal, and NIL are such key components of college football that Dabo Swinney, an old school kind of guy, doesn't really feel like messing around with a whole ton. Those are elements that make things look worse at Clemson than they actually are. There is not a single other school, not even the University of Alabama, that would look at not having a non-10-win season since 2010, winning 9 games after an 8-4 regular season, and would look to say, is a coach on the hot seat. But going into this season, Dabo Swinney has built Clemson into a perennial ACC power, where that is the standard. And the interesting component about any talk of Dabo Swinney getting to the hot seat cannot be made until this season comes to a close, because no one has a perfect year all the time. No one is a national title contender every single year, not even Nick Saban. Nick Saban just 2 seasons ago was beating up on Kansas State in the Sugar Bowl. He wasn't in the college football playoff. There were no hot seat discussions. There were over-exaggerated reports of his decline. Of course, he retired this year after he made the college football playoff again with a team that was far from the best one he ever fielded down there in Tuscaloosa. But Dabo Swinney has reset the standard and the expectations at Clemson for what they should be achieving every single year. And as you look at this ACC, it is not incredibly strong. There are a couple of good teams at the top. There are a couple of solid teams, but it is not exactly the Big Ten or the SEC. Heck, I don't even know if it has the competitive depth of the Big 12. I just think you have stronger teams and brands at the top, Clemson and Florida State most notably. But we are going to know how Clemson fans will feel about Dabo Swinney truly when the season ends, when the season actually has a chance to play out. It's not going to be judged in week 1 because they have a road game. It's a neutral site game in, Atlanta, Georgia against the Georgia Bulldogs. If Dabo Swinney wins that game, in what world is there going to be any discussion of the hot seat? I don't think they're going to win that game. Georgia's very good. So let's say they start 0-1. Then they go Appalachian State, and then they play NC State, and then they play, at Florida State. That's going to be a big game after they play Stanford, of course. That NC State game could fly under the radar. It's in Clemson, South Carolina at Death Valley. Tough place to play. But NC State, they're feeling pretty good after the 2023 season they just had under Coach Doran there. So Clemson should start 3-1. They'll have 3 straight home games after that game against Georgia. And then they go at Florida State. And then they go at Wake Forest. But then the rest of their schedule is Virginia at home, Louisville at home, at Virginia Tech, at Pitt, not exactly the toughest places to go play given the caliber of opponents there. And then they host the Citadel, end of season cupcakes, and then they host South Carolina, who's coming off a losing season. A lot of urgency there for Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks. That's a very manageable schedule. Here's the thing. If Clemson were to lose its 2 biggest games of the year and win the rest of them, in no way, shape, or form would Dabo Swinney be on the hot seat, or at least he shouldn't be on the hot seat. Because I got news for you. If Clemson has wins against a good NC State team and they dominate everybody else, and maybe they lose close to either Georgia or Florida State, both of which are away from Death Valley, and they end the season 10-2, they're probably into the ACC Championship game. Probably. But let's say there's a crazy world. Let's say there's a crazy world in which Florida State and somehow somebody else gets into the ACC title game. That's unlikely. So actually, I'm gonna retract that hypothetical and go with this one. If Clemson makes it to the ACC title game at 10-2, with their only loss being to Florida State, let's say they lost to Florida State again in the ACC title game. Do you think Clemson at 10-3 would get left out of the playoff? They could. They absolutely could. But is a 10-win regular season something you're going to fire a coach over? Absolutely not. Not when it is the guy who has reset the standard to where you could even consider, to where you could even ponder the notion that 10 regular season wins is not enough. Would you rather it be 11 if they canceled the Georgia game and scheduled Cupcake State instead? Would that make you feel better there? The way those Florida State and Georgia games play out matter a great deal. And here's the other thing. If Dabo Swinney beats Florida State, he's making the ACC title game. I don't think he's going to beat Georgia. But if they're good enough to hang with Georgia and beat Florida State on the road, and they were to go 11-1 this year with Cade Klubnik back at quarterback, second year under offensive coordinator Garrett Riley, who I think is really good, did not have the season they wanted to a year ago. No one's going to argue with you there. But if Clemson hits their ceiling, they go 11-1 and their only losses to Georgia, if they lose the ACC title game, they're in the playoff. They will absolutely, positively be in the playoff. So no, Dabo Swinney does not need to win the ACC in order to avoid the hot seat discussion. Does he need to make the ACC championship game with that schedule? Absolutely he does. But win the ACC? No, that is not a requirement for him right there. And it comes back to expectations. This is the guy who's reset the standard. He's reset what can be done at Clemson. When he doesn't quite live up to a 14-1, 15-0 sort of year, you got to think real long and hard about who you'd want instead of him. Because ask yourself this question, if you're thinking, nope, the game is passing Dabo Swinney by, who do you want to hire? Give me a list of names that are going to be better than a guy who just went 9-4 and everyone's calling him a bum. There are not a lot of coaches that win 9 games and get called a disappointment. Dabo Swinney did a year ago. I don't know that is the most logical way to examine him coaching. Should they make the ACC title game? Absolutely. If they don't, should there be hot seat talk? Not unless it is a sub 500, truly disaster of a football season. What's to expect at Michigan State? Speaking of Michigan State, did Jonathan Smith act too quickly? We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On College Football.